Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, April 8th, approximately 7:30 a.m. And I'm going to call the Concord Middle School Building Committee meeting to order. I will take roll call and let's see who's with us today. Stephen Green? Not yet.
He's going to be a minute late, I think. Up here he comes now.
Okay. I can come back. I can come back to him. Jared Stanton?
Present.
Matt Johnson?
Present.
Lori Hunter?
Present.
Justin Cameron?
Good morning.
Good morning. John Harris?
Present.
Russ Hughes? No Russ today. Kate Hanley?
Present. Russ was waving. He's here.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm here.
Sorry. Peter Fischelis?
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Great. Court Booth?
Present.
Heather Bout?
Here.
Frank Cannon?
Yes.
Chris Popoff?
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Charlie Parker?
Present.
Matt Root?
Present.
Pat Nelson?
Present.
Stephen Crane, you with us?
I am with you.
Excellent. Good morning. And Don Goriello, I'm obviously here. So good morning, everyone. We have a jam-packed agenda again. So thank you, everyone, for patiently allowing us to make our way through this today. We just distributed the March 18th meeting minutes from the last, from the March 18th meeting. I'm wondering if we want to hold on that since everyone just received them like in the afternoon yesterday. I know I haven't had a chance to review the final. So I would like to propose that we hold off on voting those in the interest of, you know, allowing everyone to have time. So unless anyone feels strongly otherwise, I'm gonna suggest that we do that. Okay. No one's objecting. So with that, I will move on to correspondence. At this point, I will ask Heather, and with some help from Kate, our awesome communication subcommittee group, I believe there was a presentation that I shared in the evening last night. I know that this group has been working hard recently to both collect and report on all correspondence we've been receiving. So Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you to speak to this item on the agenda, and there's a lot here. So one other thing, sorry, Heather, before you start. In the interest of time, I think I talked to Kristen yesterday. We want to move through all the agenda items today, and then we'll have questions. I think correspondence is one place that I'd like to, unless we get deep into the weeds on things, maybe offer that we do some questions there, Kristen, but then the rest of it, if we could just move through it at presentation style, just in the interest of time, because we want to get to everything, and then open it up to discussion and have plenty of time for that. So Heather.
Dawn?
Yes.
If I could briefly speak to that.
Sure.
It references correspondence as opposed to communications. I would value a quick update from the Finance Committee and the Select Board, because I know that we have been on their agendas, and I wonder if correspondence could indeed be that kind of communication as well.
You bet. I think that was going to be under the, thank you, Court, for that. On the other, so we have community forum, survey, and other. And other will include email correspondence, the meetings that we've been to and heard from, and part of that is the Finance Committee as well as the Select Board. So
Great.
That's forthcoming. Yes.
Yeah, we have those folks in the room. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Thank you for bringing that up. And that's absolutely going to be part of this. So thank you.
Cool. Okay, so are we ready to jump in? So we have on the agenda, community forum first, correct? So one thing that was sent around yesterday was an overview of the forum. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to look at that. Maybe let me screen share that quickly. Is that okay? And we will then be able to, oops, hold on, where is it? And of course I pulled it up, but it's not coming up.
I can say while Heather's.
Community forum report. I have it. Here we go.
You
Sorry.
have it. I was just going to say that it was last Wednesday night and there were somewhere between 100 and 150 participants is the range that I saw.
Yep, exactly. So I'm not gonna go through all this. I just wanted to share this quickly so that everybody knows that we have an update of this. If you haven't read it, please do. It will be on the website. It was a very successful forum. Like you said, about 150 people. That's I think more than we've ever had to any forum that I've done in this town. It really good engaged questions and comments. Obviously a lot about gym and auditorium and size, also about the programming and teaming, about sustainability. So all of these things were covered and all of the comments were taken down. And as always, that's all being taken into our consideration. So what you have in your emails and what will be online is kind of a summary of the questions and comments, the concepts that were covered. So I'll leave that at that, unless you wanted more detail on the forum, Dawn. Okay, then I will assume that's good for that. I'm going to stop sharing that and we'll go over to the survey, which has even a little more information to cover. So I'm going to screen share again and pull up the slides that you all received last night. I'm sorry they weren't earlier, but that was, here we go. Sorry, I'm just getting to, here we go. Okay, and now let me go to slideshow. Whoops, sorry, I needed to get it to slideshow. And play. Okay, can everyone see that? And is it big enough? Okay, good, great. So this is an overview of the survey. Before we actually dive into the survey details itself, I'm going to do a little context around it. Oops, I can't advance it. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, so a little context around it. As we all know, the forum is one piece of input among all of our input that we get. There are many sources. So I just wanted to do a quick overview of some of what's happening. As we know, the survey went out and was launched March 26th and was open through April 5th, this past Monday. During that time, we had the community forum on the 31st. I want to point out that we've had over 18 listening sessions, and those have been discussions with specific groups, as you all know, various committees in town, interest groups. So there's a lot of listening going on there. The finance committee session was March 25th. There was a school committee discussion of this March 30th. There was a select board discussion April 5th. So we're getting input from all of those places. As you all know, a lot of community emails, which I will summarize when we get to that section here. But I think the total was 87 since our last meeting. And then of course, I just wanted to point out the past community forums. We had one in January and one in February. And there's still feedback that we use based on the forums that we had back in 2019, even 2018 through 2020. So this survey is, I think, very valuable information, but it's good to keep in mind that it's one piece of many. So the survey, how did we get it out? I think that's really important. There were two different ways. There are school-based channels that we have, and there are town-based channels. So for the schools, that's relatively easy for us. We can send the district email and put it on social media. We have a school committee subscriber list. We sent it to them. The PTGs and Parents Association helped send it out. We sent it through CPAC and of course put it on concordps.org. In terms of town outreach, we did even more. This was a really, really broad effort here because it was critical that we get feedback, not just from school parents, but that this be a town-wide survey. So that was the focus. Erin Stevens, the town information officer, was very helpful here. And obviously this was a team effort. As Dawn said, this has been Kate and I all along. So between all of us, the survey went out in the Concord News and Notices, which is the email distribution list. It was on Concord social media a couple of times. The notice went to all Concord Town Committee chairs, asking them to share it with their entire committee. It was in the journal. It went to all the sustainability groups, Concord business associations, including Concord Business Partnership, the Rotary, the Chamber of Commerce. It went out through the League of Women Voters and Living Concord, and then through a bunch of different focus groups, preschools, neighborhood-based outreach, Concord-based listservs like the groups.io and Nextdoor, outreach to assisted living facilities, the Council on Aging, the library sent it out, Minuteman Media Network had it on, and of course to all the listening session groups. So there really was a broad outreach to make sure that this got to the entire town. Okay, so the survey itself, I know that's the really exciting part. We had a lot of responses, which is really exciting, almost 1,500, 1,472. So the way this was laid out was by a choose all that apply. So the Concord residents include some of the other ones, obviously. And some of those were parents, although it doesn't show it here because the ... it was parents of current students who are younger than 3rd grade and then older than 4th grade, because we figured that was the likely cutoff for who would actually use the middle school. Then current students and Concord business owners were also invited to do the survey. So some of these, I'm not going to go through in detail. Priorities about the new school. This is really exciting, fun information to have. Some of the questions that we'll look at here are really going to be more useful as we get into schematic design. Some of the questions will be more useful now. So for some of these, I'm just going to skip over them pretty quickly and say, this is great community information on what people are excited about and priorities, and we'll use it even more when we get to schematic design. We'll go to the next one. There are going to be several like that. Again, similarly, between athletic fields, outdoor classrooms, the outdoor space, this is all great information that we can use as we get to planning that outdoor space more. Using the building. This has some relevancy now, obviously, and a lot more later in schematic design. I think the interesting thing here was that for most of these use questions, the responses were occasionally. Of course, you see the blue is occasionally, except for the one where frequently won out was in youth athletics. So there's clearly a strong desire to use the campus and building for youth athletics frequently as we move forward. Measure of success for sustainability. Again, really great information that we'll use in even more detail as we go through. I wouldn't even try to speak to this but instead of Matt or Kate or others, but this will be great information as we get into schematic design. Okay, so now we get to the open-ended questions. If you look through the raw data, we have a lot. There are over 100 pages of raw responses. So what we did is we used SurveyMonkey to create a word cloud. So what you're seeing here are the words that came up most in the open-ended response. This one in particular is, how do you see the town character and history of Concord being represented? So this gives you a little bit of idea of the kind of things that come up. And obviously, as we get into schematic design, we will be using all of that information and sorting the responses in a detailed way. But we got a lot of great input there. I'm just going to keep going through pretty quickly. And at the end, we can go back to any of this, but I don't want to take too much time. Similarly, if you're a parent, what do you think your child or children feels most important in the school? Again, we got a lot of great feedback, and these are the words that jumped out in terms of the feedback that was coming in. So now we get into the assessment of priorities. These are the questions that really are very relevant to what we're doing right now and the discussions that we're going to have today. The 3 options here were in terms of the building. And as you know, hopefully everybody read through the survey. There was a lot of background information and context about where we are, the initial the initial budget range, and the various requests to look at going over. So the 3 choices were, it is important to me that we keep the project cost under 100 million. Cost of 100 million is already too high. We wanted to give people the option to say, no, bring it lower, not higher. And the 3rd is I would support going higher. So people could choose to kind of keep it as is, ask for it to be lower, ask for it to be higher. There is a majority, obviously, as you see, of I would support going above the budget. But let's also look at this realistically. It's not the huge majority that it looks like, because if you look at it as willing to go over versus not, and you combine the first two, those two come a little bit closer to the total of willing to go above budget. It ends up about, and on my screen, the actual numbers are hidden. There we go. But about 47 to 57 or 58. And you combine the first two. Very good information. The next thing we wanted to do is look at that in terms of the demographics. So in this one, we filtered that by just parents. So this is how the response came out when just parents answered. Relatively similar, actually. Still a majority for willing to go over, slightly higher, but not a huge difference from where it was in the first one. The next one looks at if you chose, and again, this is only for those who chose that they would be willing to go above the budget. For those who did, what would they want to go over budget for? And what are the priorities here? I think this is interesting that clearly the two standouts are either a combination of a larger gym and auditorium, which isn't necessarily the largest of each. It's whatever we can make work if we try to do both, or the 350 seat auditorium. The two standouts, obviously. Among the two gym options, they're relatively similar. But I think it's clearly there's a preference here for both, if possible, or the 350 seat auditorium. We also did the same breakout for this one of parents. So, and this one looks almost the same, as you see, not a lot of big differences. Obviously, we can look at the slight differences in numbers if we want. But that's where those came out. Also, I'll note quickly, I apologize that we don't have a slide like this filtered for just residents who are not parents. And I'm afraid that was a misunderstanding on my part of how the survey filter would work. At this point, we're not able to filter out the parents from the residents. We're only able to filter the parents. So, but that gives us an idea of kind of what that slant would be. So I think it's certainly helpful directionally. So this was really interesting. This was just kind of casting a broad net to see if people would be interested in some type of capital campaign to support this if it didn't get supported. And there are certainly some people. We do in the next question is about asks for emails for those people who answered yes to one or two. Not everybody put them in, but some did. So we have some contacts from people who said they would either be interested in leading an intensive campaign or interested in being a lead donor even. Only 2 of those gave us an email, but we are going to follow up with those and see where that goes. And I just, oops, hid my arrow by mistake. There we go. So lastly, there were some additional survey takeaways, and I'm going to bump it over to Kate for this because she helped to summarize this. Obviously, survey data is complex, and it's not easy to look at all 142 pages of it quickly and come up with a snapshot. But Kate did a great job of a little summarizing here. So Kate, do you want to take it over for a sec?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Heather. And, I was just, as I was reading through the survey results, you look at the graphs and to me, it kind of just seemed like, well, everybody likes everything, right? Not surprising, but tried to read through, and as Heather said, there's over 100 pages of text results from the survey because of our open-ended questions. But I read through in detail, there was a question, what did we miss? Like, what did we not talk about in the survey? And so that was the one that I dug into to see if there were some clear trends. A lot of the responses to that were not things we missed. There were things we already talked about, but people had additional thoughts on. But there were clear trends and questions we asked. So on the left, I just called out something that won't be surprising to anyone, that there were really strong opinions when you read the open-ended responses, and very much conflicting on costs, spaces, and there were many people who said, don't go over budget, it's already too expensive. And there were many people who said, spare no expense. And the same with space. Yes, we need it. No, we don't. And speed. Some people said, slow down, you're going too fast. And some said, hurry up and build this school so my kids can enjoy a beautiful school. So not surprising there, but just wanted to call that out. And then the list on the right, I won't read through all of these, but me jumped out as things that they were either people were asking questions about things like the timeline, when's it going to be open, why not MSBA? All of these things we have talked about, and I think we have answers for. But to me, it really indicated that we make sure these are covered in our FAQs that we're working on for the website, so that when these questions come up, people have a real obvious place to go and find the answer. And for ones that maybe we haven't dug in as deep on, it's something for us to note for future discussions to make sure that we come up with clear answers for folks as we move forward. So I will stop there.
Okay, thank you. And that's it in terms of the presentation. So that's kind of the survey overview. And I will get out of this and stop sharing for now, at least. Before we just open it, actually, I don't know, Dawn, do you want to do kind of discussion and questions on the survey piece first, or do you want me to go through correspondence and just kind of the other communications updates first, and then we do questions and discussion at the end of everything?
Why don't you go through the rest of your piece? I think Pat was going to speak to some of the finance committee and
Perfect.
Select board, but why don't you get through your piece and then we'll take questions on the survey and general correspondence.
Okay, perfect. So I have two other pieces, which is just the email correspondence that's in kind of the standard, and also an update on the website, the FAQs that Kate just mentioned. So let me do that first. We are working on a new website. We're hoping to launch it very soon. And I think one of the most important pieces is this FAQ section that we've been working on for a while. It is very deep. We have, I don't know, it might be over 100 questions. We have a lot of questions that Kristen and team and others have been working on creating some really great informative answers for. And I think it's going to be a very helpful way to address people's questions, people's concerns, people's curiosity. So that should be coming out pretty soon. What we're doing, since we have probably 2/3 of them answered, so to speak, I think what we're going to try to do is launch them as soon as possible with what we have. And then we will continue to add to it as we complete all the answers for each of those. Remember, each answer is not necessarily a 2-line answer. It's a lot of information about what we're doing. So this is really a big project. And I thank SMMA and Hill for the ones they've worked on, and everybody else who's been putting time into this. So we will get those up soon. One of the ones that we are now adding is going to address kind of this whole discussion and situation that we're in right now in terms of what's going on. You know, so when people ask, well, what's going on with this gym or auditorium discussion, and what's the timing, and how does the decision actually happen? I think we're going to talk about that some today. And then as we have more of a clear answer, we will add that to our FAQs and put it right up top. We might do a most frequently asked questions, so that those really timely ones are easy to find. And that'll be a way that when people ask these questions, we have a place to point them, so that we don't have, different people answering questions in different ways. So that's just the status there. The last thing then is the correspondence. So as I mentioned, since our last meeting on March 18th, we've had 87 emails and a great range of them. Let's see, about actually a lot of those, about 64 or 65, were related to the gym and auditorium and support of increasing the size of the gym and auditorium. Many pointing out right size and let's do this right. The others, and by the way, in case you're taking notes, my numbers might not add up exactly because some of the emails had overlap of different topics. So if you say I have more than 87 topics, that's why. There were a bunch that were specifically about auditorium and performing arts, probably about 15 in that area. Some that still focused on just the gym, about 6 in that area. Several very detailed, and I want to point these out, about the construction delivery method, because we will be talking about those later today. I hope everybody has read all of the emails that have come in and the detailed information, because I think that's certainly relevant to our discussions. There was, but then just to wrap up the list, one about a capital campaign, a couple with just general questions asking for information, one about timing, one about the forum and various financing thoughts, one asking that we make sure we clarify wants versus needs in this building, and one that was very generally just support of the building and the process and everything they were doing. So that's the general correspondence that we've gotten in. Obviously, I won't go into any more detail there. Let's see, Don, unless there's anything else you're looking for, I think that's all I have, and I could pass it over to Pat for reports on the various.
Yeah, why don't we get through finance committee and select board committee, all the correspondence, and then we'll do questions. How does that sound?
Yep, that sounds good. And actually, there was a discussion at the school committee, so we can report out on that also. And Court might want to jump in since both of us were there.
Excellent. Okay, let's start with Pat, and then Court, if you want to follow her as far as school committee, and then we'll
Certainly.
take questions.
Thank you, Dawn. I want to, before I start, I just want to remind the committee, or put out to the committee what we're trying to do here, what our goal was in terms of meeting with the finance committee and the select board, and gathering all of this input and the survey. Part of our charge was to get community input for this project, and I want to remind us all that we got considerable community input before the design committee made their recommendation for the space summary, and before we approved that recommendation, and before the ed plan was finalized. So where we're at now is, as we put out our space summary, we got an even greater number of responses. So I feel confident that we'd done our homework before we put the space summary out. But once you put a space summary out, that's when the community can really see what it is that you're doing. And so we've gotten a considerable amount of input. And so we wanted to we have to make some recommendations here, or make some decisions on this committee. That's our responsibility. And so before we did that, we wanted to get some more thoughts on going above and beyond the 80 to 100 million that we've been talking about in terms of the cost for the project. So that's the context. So we did go to the FinCom. FinCom had lots of input. They had lots of thoughts about this crossroads that we're at. It was the general trend from FinCom, not surprising to anyone who's been watched a FinCom meeting, was concerns about the cost of the project and the impact on taxpayers. So there were a number of comments from FinCom about the cost. The other trend, or the other theme that ran through the conversation, was process. So, and process, as I understood it, and anyone else who was at those meetings, and we have some FinCom people here can maybe speak to it as well, but as I understood it, was here we are looking at adding some community spaces, and the committee has already approved an educational plan, and we have a space summary that meets the needs of the educational plan, which is all well and good. And the arguments for adding community spaces can be very compelling. But the FinCom, repeatedly, members were concerned that there hadn't been a needs assessment that backed up or supported the addition of community spaces. So that was just a kind of wishing that we had more of a case for adding these spaces, prior to getting all of the emails and the feedback from the community. So that was, basically the three themes that I heard in the FinCom meeting. Their minutes aren't out yet, so I couldn't go back and review it, but people will be able to rewatch the meeting if they want to. And those three were the lack of process to guide the decision, cost concerns for the citizens, and wanting to have more of a needs assessment to support making a decision if we were to go in this direction. There was also, and I think we should be very pleased, a lot of support for the work that the Middle School Building Committee has done, a lot of support for the vision of the middle school and the educational plan. So there was very strong support for the project and a real appreciation for the kind of difficult place that we're in as we contemplate if we're going to pivot in terms of cost or size of the project. The select board was less prescriptive. There was a lot of discussion, and there were more diversity, I think, in the response coming from the select board than the FinCom. Certainly, there were those on the select board who are concerned about the cost and the impact on citizens' taxes. But there were also comments of if we need it, then let's invest now. If we need a bigger gym, if we need a bigger auditorium, this would be the time to invest. We should be thinking long-term about this building. What are the needs of the community long-term? And then, of course, there was the similar concerns that the FinCom expressed regarding the process to support that this is a town-wide need, and that this felt a little bit too ad hoc for some of those members of the select board. There was some discussion about that. This isn't the last building that's going to be built in Concord. It's the last school that we'll be building for hopefully the next 50 or 60 years. But there are other municipal building needs, and that will impact citizens' taxes. And again, the select board, by and large, was very positive about the middle school building project as it stands, that the educational plan has been well laid out, and that people were very supportive of the project in and of itself. So those are the two committees that I went to, and I think that, Dawn, as we gather comments, there may be other people who have maybe other memories or other impressions from those meetings. So I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, I think you summarized it quite well, Pat. I would say that the needs assessment, that was a theme that came up at both meetings. I don't understand that as anything that's our committee's charge, just a general town-wide needs assessment that there was a desire to have. Am I understanding that correctly?
That was my impression, that this wasn't a criticism of the work that we'd done as a committee. Although there were some members who were wondering if everybody had an opportunity to give their input into specifically the questions about the gym and the auditorium throughout the process. And, you know, as Heather noted, we've had numerous meetings with different groups in town, and we've had numerous listening sessions, and we've had numerous forums. So I think that given the capacity of this committee to gather input prior to making decisions, and the design committee also had lots of discussions about this, that we came to our space summary with input. We've just happened to now have considerably more input and a stronger push.
Right, and sorry, I was just going to say, as a reminder, that's part of the reason we paused, in addition to allowing the schools to do what they needed to do for reopening, you know, last May, June, when no one was really sure how this was all going to happen. And they've done a fabulous job getting the schools prepared. And as a parent, I'm very thankful. But we knew there would be a huge community input component that at that time, we weren't sure how to navigate. Folks weren't Zoom proficient quite yet. And there were a lot of avenues that we knew we'd need to pursue in order to get community input. So those were the main two reasons that we paused. So when we restarted, we knew this would be a big piece of the puzzle. So just for some context. Were you going to say something, Stephen?
Yeah, I just, because, you know, as still yet a relative newcomer, I think one of the things that I was struck by in the meetings, the forum, the finance committee, select board, even the survey results, is I didn't really even detect an undercurrent of we shouldn't even be doing the project at all. And sometimes it's like, oh, it goes without saying, but it doesn't go without saying. I mean, a project of this significance and cost, it should be said that the community understands the need for it and supports doing a project. And even at the finance committee, and I think it's really important that we kind of use that, like we're starting as a committee working on this project of a position or from a position of, let's come up with something great because the community wants to see something happen. And I think it's just really important to say that, we're not in a position of saying, should we even be doing this? There wasn't any, what, the schools are fine, just some paint and carpet and they'll be good. I mean, I think everyone, or I detected broad, strong consensus in all settings that this is a good project for the town for the here and now. So like I said, sometimes it goes without saying. I personally don't think it should go without saying in this instance.
That's true.
Yeah,
I should have said that, Stephen.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a lack of comments saying that we don't have support. There were very vocal statements of support in all of those different forums. We heard multiple times, this committee's doing a great job and we need this school and we are behind the project. So that's very important to point out. You're right.
I agree. And thank you, Stephen, for maybe stating the obvious, but to your point, it should be said and
It should be
celebrated.
Yes, Don, I have a gift for that. Thank you very much for acknowledging that.
But both the educational plan and the project, I think it's worth pointing out, there was broad support for that. So I was very appreciative of every time that was said and sort of took mental note that great, people are behind this. So I appreciate you saying that for everyone to hear if they weren't participating in these meetings. So very, very important to note that.
Don, do you want us to touch on the school committee meeting?
Oh, please, and then let's do questions.
Okay. I can, or Court, do you want to report out as chair?
I'd be happy to. We looked at the issues around continuing school operations vis-a-vis safety and logistics. We understand that as a school committee that we will take responsibility for this facility and its operations at some future date, that we don't have a formal decision-making role of any kind right now vis-a-vis the building committee. But we did poll members around construction method, looked at some of the implications of a vast project next to the Sanborn School and down the street from Peabody. The sentiment of the school committee was largely toward the construction manager at risk, which we'll be discussing later. I don't think I need to go through the different points that were considered when we leaned this way. There was the, what should I call it, the important caveat that Heather wisely noted, that the two school committee reps on this committee, Heather and I, would not be bound by that informal sentiment here, but that we heard it. That was pretty much the extent of it. Heather?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. That was a pretty good overview. I mean, there was some discussion also about, the process and all of the input and the discussion of going over budget or not. And I think there were mixed responses to it. So it wouldn't be easy to say there that there was a consolidated school committee opinion. But everybody's very curious to watch and hear. And I think the biggest thing that came out of it was, we need the building committee to really discuss this and have a clear process. And that's what we're working on today. So I think it was all very supportive of what we're doing.
It was very much framed, the design method was very much framed around risk to students, faculty, and operations, and implications of a committee, of a project of this magnitude. So we'll get into some of our thinking when we get to the 149, 149A conversations later today.
Great, thank you.
All good.
So let's take some questions on correspondence and finish out that agenda item, please. Yes, Court.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to the data gathered on parents. I was a bit confused. I've had kids go through the district, but they aren't there now. What does parent represent in terms of data in this survey and weighting of those opinions? Can you speak to that? I didn't know if I was a parent or not for this survey. In the sense that I don't have kids in the district, in the schools right now.
Okay, well, we tried to word it as parents of current students, current parents in the system. But again, to weighting, I don't think there's weighting. You know, parents don't get weighted any more or less than any others. The only reason that we asked those questions was that some people early on wanted to know, well, who's this going to go out to? Or, you know, is it just going to school parents or is it going townwide? And so those demographics were really just for us to know who's answering. It's not to weight any particular answers over any others. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I've got a second and final question. It's in regard to the website, and I think it relates a little bit to process here as well. I'm a bit curious about why a citizen committee like this would outsource our website Q&As to our architects. Number one, why are we doing that? And number two, from whence does this decision come? I didn't understand that part.
I wouldn't say it's outsourcing as much as a lot of the questions are questions that I couldn't answer accurately, and we needed our designers' help to do that. So Kristen has done a first draft of it, and now it is going through the chairs and others. In fact, one other thing, I'm glad you said this, one other thing I was going to mention and forgot was if anybody has any particular interest in seeing the website draft or the FAQ draft before it goes out, by all means, let me know. Anybody's welcome to see it or comment on it. So this isn't outsourced to the designer and then throw it on the website. It's actually, and in fact, it's not all Kristen and SMA doing it. Kate's working on some that are sustainability. Lori's working on some. So it's really taking the questions and giving them to the people who are most prepared to do a first cut at answering them, and then other people look at it as well.
And we have one citizen rep in the mix as well. You, Heather.
Me, Pat, Dawn.
Okay.
Kate, no, Kate.
Good,
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
I think Matt Roop, Matt, we might be asking you to look at some of the sustainability ones.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So it is a team effort, definitely. I mentioned Kristen because, sorry, she's done a lot of the initial drafting of the ones that I wouldn't be able to begin to respond to.
I think if I could just call, and for what it's worth, Carrie LaFleur and I are working on a Q&A on financing. So I mean, there is a mixed bag of it. But I think, you know, a lot of great questions have been asked about the project, but I think in discussions with the consultant team, similar questions have been asked on other projects. And I think that's how I looked at SMMA and Hill's contribution is they've heard similar questions and had to provide answers that are similar or may be similar to the ones that would apply here, even though Concord, this project is unique and our circumstances are unique. There may be some, there may be some comparability, and that's why I think Kristen offered to kind of take a first pass at it.
Thank you.
I just wanted to bring up the fact that we had additional correspondence, I think, from the Rec Commission.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
So
yes.
if you could just share that, please.
Thank you, Peter. Yep, Pat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We got a letter from the Rec Commission, which I sent out to folks last night. And I'm sorry for everything that came sort of at the last minute, but things were dribbling in, and we to get them out. And now I am looking for my notes from the Rec Commission meeting.
They also wrote a letter, right, Pat?
Yeah, they also wrote a letter. Their letter basically supports that we should have that the town needs more gym space. That they believe that the town needs more gym space. There was some discussion at the Rec Commission about updating their strategic plan or their I guess it's called a strategic plan on the Rec Commission. Is that right, Matt? Because it hadn't been updated since, I think, 2014. And so there was some discussion about how the Rec Commission could contribute to having a broader needs assessment of recreational needs in town. And the Rec Commissioner, or the director of the Rec Department, said that there would be interest in the Rec Department working with any groups in town to talk about how revenue could be generated by other recreation resources in town, kind of like doing with the BD Center. I apologize, Matt, you were at that meeting, right? Peter, you were at that meeting?
I think that that's fine, and that the letter actually summarizes, their perspective. So, because they were pushing really for the 2 regulation size courts, I think for the purposes of adult phys ed types of opportunities. I had asked that if they could consider the relative merits of other scenarios, and that didn't make it into the letter, and also about revenue potential, and that didn't make it in, but they did, talk about the regulation courts.
I think they also talked about the long-range plan in 2015 that goes towards the needs assessment questions that people have been asking, that identified the significant need for additional gym space back then.
Right. And now I found my notes. So I'll just add that there was some discussion that when the middle school was initially presented, prior to voting for the feasibility study, that community use of the middle school was included in what the vision of the town might be for this project. Everything else was covered, yeah.
Pat?
Yeah, Pat, I would just add in some of the past comments that were just made is that that meeting was very well received, and they were very complimentary of your committee.
Okay, thank you.
Pat, question, if I may?
Yeah.
Could we ask of the Recreation Department and the Commission if their interest in the gym rises to the level of perhaps operating it as an enterprise fund? The Rec Department has experience in this kind of revenue generation and cost offset that the school department frankly does not. And I don't think we want it to be our area of expertise.
I think there was a comment made by the recreation director in that meeting where she said that she didn't anticipate that it would be a self-funding facility.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was when she was talking about that they'd be more than happy to sit down with all the interested people and talk about how a revenue stream could be generated by such an entity, but not taking that on as a Rec Department project.
I only
we can
meant
ask that more
offsets.
directly.
I only would imagine offsets, not self-sustaining.
So I guess if I may, ultimately that question would end up on, I think, on my desk through the Rec Department. And so I would just say that, in court, this, it will be subject to an agreement between the school department and the town, because the school department manages the use of its facilities, and it would be, even though this is going to be a town facility, it's still the school department would manage its use. And so I think it's a good conversation to have in terms of what are the opportunities, but I think we would have to work out some kind of agreement, both from a usage agreement, but also a financial agreement, because there are costs associated with operating the facility that would have to be figured out as well. And so I think if the conversation about the gymnasium being larger, moves forward, we definitely will have that conversation, but I don't know that I could answer definitively as we sit here now.
Yeah, agreed on all counts. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just had one clarification on the select board comments, because I did actually go back to the tape yesterday.
Good for you, Matt.
Spot here. And I think that just in your summary, the one comment that you had made about, thinking beyond the immediate cost and building a school you know, that takes into account the community needs. That was made by a member of the public during the
okay.
public comment.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
just a note, you know, that the select board members had a series of questions about things like enrollment estimates and, you know, but that they mainly, you know, in terms of the concerns that were expressed and other thoughts was, yes, it's good that you've gotten both community input and, you know, ours as another source of input that we didn't necessarily help with the final decision, but at least it's one more source of feedback. And, you know, the concerns were around tax bill, capital, future capital needs and process.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah. Dean, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. Thank you for recognizing me. Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. I'm the Finance Committee observer to this committee. I just want to return to Heather's presentation of the summary that she did of the survey. You're able to tease out parental responses versus the larger population, but you can't find a way to get down to the alternative, which is the other populations that are not parents. Would you be able to make those that the survey available so either I could or others could look at it and try to, you know, reverse engineer that? It just seems unusual that you can't get to the opposite number, which is people who did not identify as parents and what were their opinions.
Yeah, I thought that was unusual too. I agree, Dean. I think that's fine. I mean, as far as I know, this is the survey will be public information, and if you think you can reverse engineer it, I love that. So
yeah,
I'd be happy to share it with you.
Yeah, so if you could, you know, I'm not interested in going down to the level of like every individual comment or any of that. I'm just looking at these numeric things, whether we can find a way to get to those numbers, because, you know, to show one set and then just, you know, not show the reverse seems unfortunate. That's all.
It should be simple. You just subtract parents from total and do the percentage.
But because the way this was just presented, it was in percentage numbers, so you don't know what the raw individual counts are. So if you had the counts, you could do it.
They're there.
They're there, exactly. They're there.
In our 36-hour turnaround, the closest I could get was subtract out the numbers.
Thank you. I wanted to say that as well, and that is that you have had very little time to go through this and really be very careful about it. So thank you for doing as much work as you have so quickly.
No problem.
But yeah, so we can communicate offline, Heather, about how I might be able to get access to the raw numbers.
That'd be great. I'll follow up with you. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks.
So we have a lot to cover. Lorraine, is your hand up? No. Okay. I just see a hand where you were. Oh, okay. And if there aren't any more questions, I think I'm going to push us to move on. And I want to note that we're not planning on making any decisions today, although that always can change. We're going to have another presentation sort of to give this whole question some more context, and then some discussion. But this committee has some work ahead, and we'll need to come out with a consensus and a direction, which we expect to happen at our April 15th meeting.
So I think with that, Pat, we'll move on to the Article 14 reminder of that was 2 years ago, back in 2019, our charge as a committee, and then decision-making and process to get us to the start of schematic design. And then with that, on the heels of that, there'll be a short presentation about the above scope discussion, like what pieces of this are above and beyond what we are currently including in the project. And that's when we'd love to hear from everyone on the committee, as many committee members that are comfortable sort of asking questions. There's time to ask questions today. If we don't have an answer, we can get you an answer ahead of the 15th meeting. So we want to get through the presentation in its entirety and then have discussion, questions, and then take public comments after the committee is through with asking questions and commenting. So with that, I think actually.
And I was taking it from
Yep,
here.
thanks, Lori. I wasn't sure if Kristen was doing a quick overview, but please, Lori.
Yeah, we were going to start with Article 14. And I think the reason it was important to, do this look back, in a lot of the settings, I keep hearing they said. It wasn't they that said things on town meeting. It was we, Jared, I, the school committee. All the information that got put forward was out of my office and in conjunction with the school committee. An awful lot of work went into those. And we did the best we could with what we had for information, knowing at that point you're working in a pretty conceptual space without actual plans or an ed plan or much detail. So you're doing your best to put things forward. That was April of 2019. Then the select board created the charge in May. So we were just going to take a quick look at that. And then for context, just a reminder to all of us where the 80 to 100 came in. We've had a lot of comments in different settings about the vote of that. There's been no vote on numbers, just to be sure we're all clear. We've set targets and we used a number at town meeting as a placeholder, but there's been no vote on numbers. So we just wanted to go back to the artifacts of those different settings and just at a high, quick level, just remind us all. And Jared, hop in at any point. This is your work, really. So these are some of the slides actually from April town meeting 2 years ago. You can see we were doing our best estimates. Jared, do you want to just talk on where these numbers came from?
Everybody. So at that time, we spoke to no less than 4 or 5 OPMs in the field, MSBA, designers, and they were talking about the price per square foot. So we used what we knew at the time based on the prior report in 2017, what the square footage was, and that's why we used 125,000. It has since been increased, but the cost escalation we were hearing between 2010 and I want to say 2016, 17, it was going up every year from 6 to 8%. So we assumed at the time that we were going to be right then at a 90+ million, and every year you waited, it would be an increase of 6 to 8%. So we did estimate that if after a 2-year wait that we would be potentially over $100 million.
So Kristen, you can go to the next slide, I think. I just can't stress enough, and I think I know I said it all through the process. The 90 million was just so we could put something out there. It was conditional and we tried to qualify it over and over and over again. And I know we knew that was a hard process and was going to be something we would continue to talk about for a long time. And indeed we are. This is the slide that showed some of the potential escalations, just so you can see that what Jared is talking about was referenced. So just a reminder of how it was presented. The amendment was voted in. So this is what was adopted at that town meeting as a formal vote, that this would be a net zero ready building. So that isn't up for discussion as far as town meeting is concerned. I think that's one piece for us to be really clear about. And just in terms of referencing community, this is the slide where we, at that debate, showed we'd valued renovate versus rebuild as a process point. And you can see community was mentioned there. There's no question we intended community to be part of the discussion. To what impact and scale and size, that certainly hadn't been discussed, which is what we're doing now. The one, aside from net zero, the only other thing that was voted was $1.5 million towards the work we're doing now in feasibility and schematic design. The building charge created by the select board in May of 2019, I'm not going to read this to you, but certainly we're following and abiding by it to guide us through these processes, make recommendations to the town manager on all financial, contractual, and schedule matters. And then there's a piece clearly on community shall ensure community engagement throughout the planning and execution. I feel really good. I hope you do about our alignment with that charge, but it's good to keep it in front of us. And then just final note of where did the 80 to 100 million come from? It initially, and you have to remember how early this was, at least in my, look back, July of 2019, this committee was just getting put together. We'd met a couple of times. We had to get an RFS out for an OPM. So we don't have an OPM. We don't have a designer. We need something in the RFS as a placeholder to help the professionals know the scale of the project they were bidding on. So you can see these in the minutes right from the meeting where we had some dialogue about what was going to go into the RFS. And that is initially where it came from. And I think we've revisited it a couple of times in this group as a target. Because you have to have a target, right? And I think we've really tried to align ourselves with that and came with an ed plan that complied. But it was never a vote. So it was just worth mentioning the history. It's been helpful, I know, to me, and I lived all of this to remember what happened when and how, and hopefully that's been helpful to you this morning too.
Great. So I wanted to start with kind of a work plan update. I think, we started out with a layout on the schedule. And I think, now that we're toward the end in the April and May, where we had planned for a schematic design kickoff in May, we just wanted to do a refresher on that and talk about process. So just like what's been talked about so often is there was always this looping of design team presenting information and getting committee feedback and so on, community feedback, and then the subsequent vote. So I think there's been a lot of that process that's happening and has happened. We discussed that the March 4th vote was on the space summary that reflects the ed plan. What we did a lot here in the January, February months was do a lot of listening sessions and a lot of outreach and review of the ed plan. And on March 4th is when it was presented that we have a space summary that meets the ed plan requirements and is within the $100 million budget target. So that was our jumping off point. And as Pat described, that's when the community then became very aware of what the proposal was for the concepts. On our March 18th meeting, we came back with the concepts updated with our partners from Ewing Cole, knowing already that the gym was a discussion. So that was already accommodated in the floor plan and had our community meeting forum on the 31st. So in the original schedule, I just wanted to remind everyone that we were having planned a meeting for next week and then one on April 29th at the end. And at that April 29th meeting is where we were planning on voting the preferred schematic. And that was assuming 2 months or really more like 6 weeks of concept development so that we could again kick off schematic design in May. So I think what the nuance is that, at the March 18th meeting with a space summary and a plan that fit within the $100 million budget target, there wasn't much more work that needed to be done on the concept plans per se. And that's when we moved and turned our attention to more community listening and all of these meetings with Select Board, FinCom, and so on. So this time right here has really been consumed with more listening, more community input and everything. And we've added a meeting here to really summarize that. So that's the purpose of today, is really to go over all the information that we've gathered, present the response and the information based on the community feedback, and then see what we can do about the subsequent meetings. So on process, this is really just an extension of our process that we've had so far. So our March 4th space summary vote occurred. There was a lot of community feedback that took place, including the Select Board FinCom meetings. Here we are reviewing and discussing the events that have occurred. And then the question is, as Pat stated, with all the information that we have, can we discuss this today and at our next meeting and arrive at a vote for the scope? And so that would be something that we'd like to really get feedback on in this meeting. And again, this is all in alignment with our overall project schedule, where we were assuming a early May or late May schematic design kickoff. And so we're still on track with the overall project schedule. And I think that's been some concern and question that's been raised. So the space summary that was approved accommodates that team teaching model that everyone has discussed. It made adjustments and efficiencies to the educational spaces so that an auditorium for 1 grade was added, and the gym was enlarged by 1,000 square foot to have more run out for the MIAA court and so on. So that's where we are today. Again, noting that we do already have concept plans that reflect the 2 MIAA cross-court gymnasium, because we knew we had heard about that earlier than the auditorium community requests. So again, this upper plan is the one that reflects the educational plan requirements and is within the $100 million budget target. The expanded gymnasium is what is going into this above budget scope discussion as laid out. We studied the massing and the integration with the site and developed a site plan that accommodated the parking that's required for the educational plan meeting its requirements. And then we heard a lot of community feedback about adjacent construction and what does this mean for the school while it's in operations, and also just generally about phasing. And so the site team took the time to put this dashed red line in showing the existing Sanborn School. And you can see the entirety of the new school site development is actually outside of where your current even parking facilities lie. So, so this is the existing school building, the modulars, and then the existing parking. So, you know, that's a fair distance away from the school operations itself, and then even with the buffer of the existing parking. So we dash that in for context and understanding. We've spent a lot of time reviewing the cost per square foot. Again, this is all toward that $100 million project cost target and how it relates to the other projects that are out there and documented by the MSBA. And we're really right in that mix where the other projects lie. So I just want to go quickly over those above budget scope items that we've been hearing from the community so that we can get to discussion sooner. We have some information on the existing gymnasia at both the schools and that they're the equivalent of 3 teaching stations and no MIA regulation size courts in the existing. The plan that we have in our current space summary has the gym with 2 teaching stations and provides a 3rd in the alternate PE. So that again is the equivalent of 3 teaching stations. We have here our diagram that we've shown of how that lays out in the 7,000 net square foot gym. In terms of the auditorium, the existing Sanborn we know has 350 seats. Peabody Forum has 175. We're targeting an auditorium with 270 because that would accommodate 1 grade plus staff. And again, based on our interviews and all the information gathered, would meet the requirements of the educational plan and its day-to-day operations. So then there was the question about what would the cost increases be for any one of these above budget scope items. And so here we have the ed plan at the top listed, and there's no additional cost rate that's within our $100 million target. If we were to add 1 MIAA court, the budget range increase would be here. We have a scenario where the cross courts are not MIAA, but they're 46 by 74 foot. This was based on a presentation that was given to us by the CCYB, where that's determined to be the adequate practice court size. You know, they're not looking necessarily for 2 full MIAA cross courts. So this was, again, information from CCYB. We heard that there is an interest in understanding what would it be if we stayed at status quo, if we just had the auditorium not at 270, but at 350, which is what we have today. And then here the scenario where it would be a 2-grade auditorium that also has space for staff, for example. So these are the budget ranges. Now, the difference in the delta that's presented here, I wanted to note, is based on the net square foot in one scenario for the increase or the gross square foot. So because it is in essence an extension of a space that we're already providing, and they are very large open volume spaces, we believe that when designed, this will fall somewhere between the net square foot, if you just add the net square foot that it takes for the second court, for example, and the gross square foot where it has that 1.5 multiplier for the wall thicknesses, storage, and so on. So we provided this range because it's likely to fall really in between there. It's not going to be as efficient as only a net square foot increase, and it's not going to be as large as a gross square foot increase, which assumes all the corridor and storage and so on. So also understanding that there is an interest in, well, not one of these items, but a combination. We really looked at every combination and what that would mean for the project budget increased range that you'd be looking at. So on your smallest sizes, you'd have the smaller cross courts, status quo gymnasium, auditorium, and this would be your increased range. And then all the way up to your larger 2 MIA cross courts and 2 grade auditorium, and this would be your highest end of the range. I know that we did a lot of discussion around the 15% impervious lot coverage, and we studied them with the parking that's currently included in the educational space summary, which is the 134 spaces. So we left that unchanged, and it's the only combination that falls slightly outside of that 15% is the gross square foot version of the 2 largest combinations. So that's to say that the impervious area for A, B, and C, assuming the 134 spaces are it would not trip over the 15% lot coverage. Only this one would need to be looked at very closely. So now I'm going to hand it off to a refresher on project delivery method with our partners from Hill.
Great, thank you, Kristen. So I'm going to take a step back here. I'm going to reintroduce myself because we have a lot of people on the call this morning. So I'm Ian Parks. I'm with Hill International. We were hired as the owner's project manager on the job. And we have presented on this topic before. We presented on the February 11th meeting. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on these slides, but just wanted to do a quick recap there and then dive into greater detail because we did receive, the committee received 2 letters that had some pretty strong opinions for CM at risk. And so we just wanted to kind of lay that out a little better for everyone to understand the side-by-side comparison. So, so I'm actually not going to speak much to these first few slides here. So if you want to go to the next one, this just kind of gives you a general overview of pros and cons and what we presented before. If you want to stop on the last slide here, Kristen. This was where we came in and talked about known factors and influences for the Concord Middle School project. And so, you know, we at Hill, we are currently, we have 16 school projects that are open right now that we're actively working on. So, you know, we have a pretty wide lens of projects that we look at. And, you know, they range in size and complexity. And, you know, I can speak to projects that I'm currently working on as well in relation to Concord Middle School. But, you know, kind of what we looked at here was how this project lends itself to design, bid, build. And the reason being is that, you know, there's sufficient time for the design and bid phase. The risk can be managed through quality of drawings and specs. You know, we can deal with the sustainability features as a design and OPM team. We don't necessarily need a CM involved. This isn't, you know, in the grand scheme of projects here, this isn't a very complex project in that there's plenty of space to build. You're building in an open field environment. This isn't a compact urban site in which the logistics really need to be buttoned up by a CM. And it's not, you're not doing an ad reno in which you have to manage the school population and keep people safe and that sort of thing. So we were asked for a professional opinion, and this was our professional opinion. SMA concurs with this as well. But we just wanted to provide that opinion to you guys here. And, in contrast, the two projects that I was speaking about before is the Brookline High School and the Carter School projects. Brookline High School is under construction right now. It's a CM at risk project, and there's no way that, there's a way, but it definitely lends itself to CM at risk, being that multiple buildings, it's a tight site, it's in an urban environment. They're building over the railroad tracks, so we're dealing with rail agencies. It's a very, very complex project, and having a CM on board was key to being able to deliver this project. And that's, very, very different than what we're dealing with here at Concord Middle School. So I'm going to switch over to another.
Hey, Ian, can I just interrupt while you're switching over slides? Two things.
Sure.
One is the February 11th meeting is available. The video is linked on the meeting notes on our website. I went back and watched it this morning just as a reminder, what was talked about, what questions were asked. And I just want to be clear, you mentioned, Ian, regarding phased occupied, which is basically where you're renovating a building that the students are learning inside of, and reference safety from a CM standpoint. Safety is the number one concern, whether either direction. I just want to be really clear that student safety is like top priority, whether you're going to
absolutely
or CM at risk. So just for clarity, that's a non-issue. That is like their number one priority. So I just want to clarify that. I think your comment related to students within a building that is under construction versus one where it's like a shared site, still a priority. So
and Dawn, sorry again, we've done a lot of these right now. We've got 8 or 9 in 149. We've got 5 in 149A. Hill and SMMA are perfectly happy working whatever arrangement is arrived. We've done both. We were asked to give an opinion, so usually we're just presenting it to the committees. I also would add, just interestingly, and again, not to take any side here, but the Brookline bifurcated their project, so that particular job that Ian's working on, that went 149A, where Skanska was hired, part of that project was in addition to their existing building. They separated it so they could go 149 design bid build on that part. So they split the project in two, so that project actually has 2 delivery methods and 2 projects of which we're doing. So sorry, I just wanted to add those things.
Yep. Sorry.
Thanks, Peter. And for everyone who doesn't know Peter Martini works from Hill International, works with Ian.
Thanks, Don. And Ian, I was happy that you started with saying, well, I should have done the same thing. Thank you.
No, for those that don't know you.
Yep.
And what am I looking at, Kristen? Is this you or Ian sharing?
So I'm trying to understand what
down the middle
I've got.
Screen?
Oh yeah, something happened, Ian. There's just a line.
2 screens here, so let me unplug one.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Can you see? Okay. Yeah.
Blue beam session. Yep.
My other screen was messing things up. Sorry. So what we're looking at here, this was kind of a deeper dive. And again, this was in response to some feedback that the committee got. So what the aim here is to do is to lay things out side by side at different phases of the project. And so you've got design bid build on the left here, CM at risk on the right. And I'm just going to walk you through what it looks like for both methods. So from an estimating standpoint, right now we've hired 2 professional estimators. So one's hired by SMMA, one's hired by Hill. And those 2 estimators have already done a feasibility estimate. They're going to do a schematic estimate. They're going to do 30, 60, 90% estimates, and we use those two estimators to reconcile those estimates. So they do an independent estimate of one another, and then we sit down and we talk about differences and basically agree on a final estimate number for each one of these phases. So that's kind of the estimating for design, bid, build. The only difference with CM at risk is that you add the construction manager to that. So you have a third independent estimate source. And that would only happen for 30%, 60%, 90%. We wouldn't have a CM on board at schematic design. So those are the differences there. Kind of same scenario here with design. So you have, design reviews at 30, 60, 90, and 100 that Hill would do. The committee obviously has the ability to look at these as well and provide feedback and comments. And so that's what it would look like for design, bid, build. And then the only difference there for CM at risk is that you have a construction manager that's reviewing and providing comments as well on design iterations. So very similar, just adding a CM. So this is kind of where this is a lot of information, I know. So this is kind of where things start to take a turn here in your bid and award process versus your CM selection process. And so I'll walk you through it. So design, bid, build, you've got 100% bid set that you utilize for bid. There's a pre-qualification process for both the general contractor and subs. And it's very much a qualifications-based process. We look at the DCAM reviews, which are very important, in doing business here in Massachusetts. Everyone wants a good DCAM review. They want to know that you've done a great job for clients on previous projects. So we look at DCAM reviews. We look at past performance. We look at references from other clients and really vet out both GC and subs. So we would be looking at a competitive bid process after the 100% set. So Q1 or 2 in 2023, at which time the filed sub bids would happen. So you'd have the results of those. And at the same time, roughly the same time that you have the bids. So basically the filed sub bids, you receive those, you get the GC bids a few weeks after. And so there's kind of a few avenues here. If you're within the budget, you green light go. If you're over budget, you kind of change scope and rebid. And that's, you can see, is similar for both sides for filed sub bids. So, and what I highlighted here for filed sub bids is that, it's close to 60% of your construction costs. So it's the exact same filed sub bid process for both delivery methods. And that covers 60% of your financial risk. So what we're really talking about here, the difference is about 40% of your financial risk here in delivery method. So design.
Yeah, just give a quick recap. The non-filed bids are demolition. Just everybody has an idea. Demolition's not a filed bid. Site work is not a filed bid. Concrete, steel, drywall, millwork. Those are the major bids that are not filed bids, and the general contractor picks his own and proceeds with those, just so everybody knows.
Yep. Thank you. So one thing to note is if the bids come in lower than your budget, then the bid savings go back to Concord. And I put a sampling of general contractors that have been awarded recent MSBA projects on here. You've got Agostini, Bacon, Bond Brothers, Brate Builders, CTA, Fontaine, HV College. And these are kind of I went to the MSBA website and found all of this information and kind of compiled it here. So to contrast that with CM selection and the CM at risk model here. So we've got we would put out an RFP, a request for proposal for CM services. There would be a selection process that would involve proposal reviews, interviews, and team selection. And we would put out the notice to proceed to the CM in late 2021 prior to design development, because the goal here would be to get them on board prior to design development in 2022, whenever that process starts. And they would come on board early. So they would provide pre-construction services for estimating, design, logistics, schedule, et cetera. But it's for a fee. So the fee that you're looking at is around $300,000 to $400,000. And, you would need a separate appropriation for that. It would not fit into the 1.5 million that's already been appropriated. So that's something that you would have to pursue up front here in 2021. Again, filed sub bid process is the same, exactly the same. GMP is really where you understand the final cost of the project. And so we had much success with the Weymouth Chapman Middle School in writing a contract that was very detailed and specified exactly when we needed a guaranteed maximum price submitted. So that was a couple weeks after the filed sub bids, and I put 4 to 8 weeks in here, kind of as showing that model, which is aggressive, and it can be done because we had success doing it with Weymouth Chapman School, but there can be times where guaranteed maximum price is for whatever reason kind of pushed down the road, and you're not understanding what your final cost is until a quarter of the way through, midway through construction. But if we were to go that route, we would want to model it towards the Weymouth Chapman Middle School and try and get that GMP as early as possible, and have some financial peace of mind there. So CM at risk contract awarded for SBA. Agostini has done joint ventures at CM at risk. Bond Brothers does CM at risk. So those are kind of the two that move back and forth. Daniel O'Connell's sons, Lee Kennedy, Skanska, Turner, W.T. Rich, Barn, Bark, and Sigley, Gilbane, Shamit, Suff, and Walsh. So you probably recognize names on both sides here, but just wanted to give you a preview of who you would be looking at for those two delivery methods. So moving on to cost, and this is probably the most important part here to consider. So for total project cost, pre-con services are zero. For design, bid, build, you don't have a contractor on board, so you're not paying for those services. The project cost is known a little earlier in the process at bid award and what we're projecting early 2023. The bid savings goes back to Concord if there is any. And right now we've currently factored the DB delivery method into the $100 million budget and projection. And so that's covered currently. If we were to go CM at risk, you would have pre-construction services that range from $300,000 to $400,000, which I already touched upon. You would know your project cost a little later for a guaranteed maximum price by mid-2023. I put that in there as a placeholder. It's not factored into the current budget, and so what that means is, you would be looking at an increase to the total project cost of $5 to $9 million, assuming $100 million budget, and that's using 5 to 9% of the construction costs. That's what we see here in the market, and so that's a considerable factor here that you'd be looking at a significant added cost for going CM at risk, and a cost that in our opinion wasn't warranted because of the complexity of the job. We don't want you to spend money that you don't need to spend on services that are already covered by the professionals that you've already hired, with Hill and SMMA. So schedule wise, you've got a little less flexibility in the schedule and the construction schedule. For design, bid, build, you kind of have your professionals put together durations and identify a substantial completion date as part of the bid package, and the contractor has to follow that. In CM at risk, you have a schedule that's developed both by the OPM and architect, but the CM also provides input and kind of puts together their construction schedule. And so they kind of drive the construction schedule development process. There's more flexibility there with CM at risk. So you could, if you wanted to, put together early release packages. You could do an early site work package in this scenario just to get shovels in the ground early. Again, this is something that we didn't really think was warranted for this type of project that we're looking at. And your substantial completion date, you wouldn't finalize that until GMP. So you wouldn't know what your substantial completion date is until a little later. So you don't know kind of when the doors are going to open until a little later in the process. All things considered, for construction and closeout, you've got a different invoicing process here. DBB is much easier on the invoice front. So it's based on percent complete, pretty simple invoice process. It's a little more complex with CM at risk. You've got invoices based on work in place that's been done or materials that are stored. And it has all the backup. So they're more robust invoices with a lot of information there, all transparent information. So pretty much equivalent in terms of the sequence of operations, the quality of construction, the substantial completion and turnover of the buildings, all really similar processes there, i.e. the results. So at the end of the day, you're getting a school, a quality building that you're happy with if you go with either method here. And as far as GMP goes, any savings on the GMP side would go back to Concord. So I said earlier that bid savings would go back to Concord on DBB. At bid time, you really wouldn't know what your savings are for the project, if any, until the end of construction, and you reconcile costs with the GMP savings going back to Concord, if any. So that kind of lays out the two delivery methods in detail. I realize it's a lot of information, but we wanted to respond to the letters that were received and kind of give you a deeper dive on what these two methods would look like. So.
Okay, so I think that's the end of the presentation piece, including the sort of reminder of Article 14 and the charge, and then the above scope and the CMAR versus DBB conversation. So I guess I'd like to open it up for questions. Go ahead. Who's got questions on any or all of it?
Can I ask a point of order here? A point of order. This is Charlie. Are we going to come back to CM at risk later, or are you basically taking questions and we're going to deal with the CM at risk issues now relative to Ian's presentation? How are you managing this stuff?
So we want to ask questions and get answers today, and I think we were looking to vote at the 15th meeting. So give everyone time to process, give everyone time to, if there are follow-up questions that we need to answer ahead of voting. The idea was that we would give everyone time to, it's just a lot of information, and a lot of it's new to you know, they've done a presentation before, they followed up with more context, more information today, and then allow everyone to digest it, consider
Right.
it, ask questions about it. Is that answering your question, Charlie?
Is this the time slot then to have
Yeah.
the discussion today with respect to CM at risk and DBB?
Well, I think we have probably about 20 minutes today to you know, divvy up how, because we do need to get to public comments as well. But I think if we want to, we could focus on gym auditorium for a piece of that and then focus on CMAR. They're both huge topics that I'm sure a lot of people have questions and comments on. So do you want to on the...
Let's hold the questions then on CMAR and DBB until we get through the auditorium and gym then.
That's fine. Let's divvy it up that way. Since that was presented first, we can talk about it first. So do you have questions on that, Charlie?
On which?
The auditorium and gym.
Oh, auditorium and risk. Yeah, the auditorium and gym. Yes, certainly. Do we have questions? I guess I do have questions.
Great.
Yeah, on the expanded gym, you know, we've gone from, over time, we've gone from 6,000, which was the original, you know, space situation, 6,000 net square feet. We went to 7,000 to add the scorekeeper and some additional area for seating. SMMA had option 1, which was 8,600 net square feet. And then we jumped to 10,600 without ever having much consideration of the expanded option number 1. Now, I spent some time looking at the expanded option number 1, and it just seems to me that you know, that significantly does represent a capability to have a you know, an very adequate cross-court playing environment, and it saves a significant amount of space. That's quite a bit of jump to go from 86 to 10.6. You're talking 2,000 net square feet or 3,000 gross square feet, and all we're adding, from what I can see, is 4 feet of additional dimension for the width of the cross court. Now, I don't see any situations where cross courts are recommended for junior high that are in the range suggested by the 10,600 requirement. So it just seems to me that the 8,600 option 1 that was presented ever since last March is very adequate to get the job done, and would allow a you know, a significantly sized out cross court of 42 by 74. It's a lot of detail to put out there, but you know, I think there are some questions, and I would assume other people would have them too, about how we got from 86 to 10.6 and the necessity to make that kind of move when boys and girls can play nearly a full court next to one another, you know, in the range of, let's say, 8,600 square feet to 9,000 square feet of gym space. So, I mean, if you want to save some money and save some space and do the right thing in terms of playing boys and girls next to one another, you don't really need to go to the full 10,600. So I guess that's my comment. I suppose that's also my question.
Dawn, do you want to, yeah, we only have about 20 minutes left of the meeting. Would it be good to get everyone's questions documented? Because I think if we do Q&A, we might not, you know, that we're going to run over.
But just one other comment. I mean, we've never seen this option played out on a piece of paper that I've seen. So not before this committee. So this is an important space question.
Which option? The 8,600 at 42 by 74?
10,600. No, the 8,600 has been, quite well presented.
Okay. So you're suggesting the 10.6 hasn't been, just for clarity. I wanted to make sure.
I don't think we've spent much time on it.
Okay.
Or any.
Okay. So
I want to make sure we hear from as many people on the committee as we possibly can. So I kind of agree with Kristen that let's get some more input from the committee and questions that we can then address over the next week and bring back to the 15th. Are we comfortable with that? Thank you, Matt. Matt's comfortable with it. So, Matt Johnson, you had your.
Mike, I realized my comment was about the CMA at risk versus design bid built, so I'll hold for now.
I've got questions on that as well, so I'll hold off on those.
Yeah, I think we'll come back around for those. So let's take all the gymnasium auditorium questions, and then we'll do the CMAR DBB questions.
So on the I'll just throw one out on the, well, maybe there's more questions on the gym first. Let's hit those.
Yeah. Frank, did you have your hand up?
Yes, but isn't the question here the adult playing on the court in the evening? We have not figured out what we're going to do with that part of the situation. They want 2 courts. And where do we go for direction on this? Is the town going to give us direction? Who's going to give us direction to go with that in our plans?
We are. I want to emphasize that this is in the hands of this committee now, unless anyone totally disagrees with me. We are at the point where we need to decide what's the scope of this project. And there have been requests for a larger gym, for adult play, for recreation. And that's why it's so important for people to weigh in now. We've heard a lot of feedback from the community. We're going to have to make a decision, but it's us that are going to come back to the town and say, we're presenting you with a $110 million project or a $100 million project.
Let's just say Frank's question is the right question. We've already extended the court, the single court, to be a full MIAA court, which is larger than what is required for a ed plan or for little kids that are in middle school. So we've already done something. Now, should we do twice as much? That's what needs to be sorted out. And that's why I think Frank is right on with that question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Chris, did you have your hand up?
Yes, just for sake of getting all of our questions clearly on the record, my recommendation is, and I'll try to follow it myself, is state all of our questions. Let's go around and have everyone have an opportunity to ask all questions, and let's not go back and forth on each question. I'm happy to spend a lot of time this morning, but I suspect if we continue, we'll be here till noon or 11 o'clock. So with that, I have some questions going back to Kristen's 4 combinations and the site constraints to consider. The comment was combination D takes us slightly over the 15% cap, we'll call it, or site barrier. I'd like to know how much over that combination D would go. And a couple of sub questions of that is, A, would we need a variance in order to do that? We want to define that. And B, is it desirable to get a variance with respect to kind of environmental goals we have for the project? And if we want a variance, do we have a sense of how probable and sort of the magnitude of the variance matters? Because site constraints are going to drive a lot of this before we get to the various options and before we get to even on budget stuff. So those are my questions with respect to both gym and auditorium. And then we get into playing off the various options of larger auditorium, larger gym, or moving them back and forth relative to each other in order to be within the site constraint. And then the last thing is questions, I think, for the committee and for our design professionals is, are there certain variables we're still kicking around that we really think are constants? So for example, have we nailed down and we're all comfortable with the amount of space allocated to the core functions? So that now becomes a constant we're working around. And therefore, the 2 other main themes, auditorium and gym,
have more flexibility or constraints. So I think that covers, at least for now, my questions. I may have some others and I'll shoot them off in emails to our professionals at the committee. Thanks.
Matt, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Pat. I guess my primary question is about process and timeline. I know that there's a lot of discussion about the gym and the auditorium. My sense is there is concern from the community that a vote that we take next week will be a final decision. And in my mind, I don't think that's true. I guess I feel like we're still in feasibility. We're trying to move into schematic design. And it's my expectation that the size of the auditorium and the size of the gym are issues that we can continue to wrestle with as we move through schematic design. But I want to make sure my expectation is on target. So that's my question is, would we be able to take a vote next week? And I think Chris's question about more setting in place the core school building spaces is a critical one. But would we still continue to have flexibility going forward around the gym and the auditorium? So that's my primary question. I guess just while I have the stage, I'll provide a couple additional thoughts. Is that, I feel like the size of those two spaces, we obviously as a committee have to wrestle with and deal with. I feel slightly uncomfortable as a committee member taking responsibility for those decisions. Because it does seem to get more into community needs and outside of the school needs. But I think that it is absolutely something that we're going to have to deal with. I guess my hope is that we can have a solution where we present options back to the community, and that they would be able to have a more official vote rather than us making a unilateral decision. And I look forward to the CM at risk discussion as well. I have more questions there.
Matt, can I clarify your question so I'm sure I've got it? It sounds like you're asking, is there a way within the context of getting this building built on the timeline that we've got, is there a way that we can turn the decision back over to the community in some kind of a vote? Like a special town meeting, like how, I'm not sure I understand.
Well, sorry, I think my question specifically is, can we continue to discuss and figure out the size of the gym and the auditorium in schematic design? Or is this a drop dead date of next week that we're looking to make a decision on? My hope is that we can continue to discuss it in schematic design. That's my question. And then my comment that I think you were more trying to tease out, Pat, is how I guess my hope is that our final solution will be to present options to the town that we can get a vote from them on, rather than us making a decision for the whole community based on all the factors that we've seen. Because I think the survey shows it's close, but it's relatively split on costs. And is this the right committee to be making such an important decision? So I would love to turn it back to the town, but we'll see if that's an option.
Okay. Peter, I see your hand up.
Yeah, wanted to make a few points. First of all, I wanted to clarify that it was brought up at the FinCom meeting that the vote that we took was kind of indicative that that's the design that we were approving. And I wanted to make very sure it was clear, and for the record, that there were those of us who asked very specifically that if we did vote for the space design as it was proposed, did that mean that was what we were locked into? And we were told, no, we had a lot of flexibility. We could still look at it. So I don't want the people to assume that because that vote happened, that we were all good with that. So that's number one. Number two is, to me, I've seen a lot of the correspondence and talked with a lot of people, and I'm very comfortable that this community is looking for us to include the community in some way with the auditorium and the gym, and that this is our chance to do this. That's what I've heard loud and clear. Obviously, costs are important and there's trade-offs to be made, but my sense is that we really need to listen to that, and that there have been past projects where the community feels like we haven't done that and done a good enough job. My question also is similar to Matt's, in that, can we come up with some options for the community to weigh in? I don't know whether it's at the meeting, at the special town meeting when they vote. Can we have a couple of options where they can choose and make their voices heard? I know it adds a little bit of complication, but given everything we are hearing from the community, I think that approach would make a lot of sense. Lastly, I have a question for Hill and SMMA, is that the costs we put out there, I know, are based on square footage and gross square footage and so forth. My question is, if we had two designs and we went out to bid, are those numbers that are being presented, if we had one that had the existing space summary and one that had a larger gym and a larger auditorium, are those numbers accurate of what the additional costs would be, or would they come in some amount less? Because in my mind, if you're building the building, adding something at that time, taking an average square foot does not seem to make intuitive sense, but I'm not the expert, and so that's a question I have.
Yeah, I think that your intuitive sense is correct. Adding that square footage into an existing building, although I think for planning purposes, it's reasonable to continue to use the square foot basis because the building is being designed bigger. Your comment about, well, if they both went out to bid at the same time, would it be the square footage? That's a very good point. And it would be less per square foot if you looked at two buildings being bid at the same time, which is a way to look at it.
Peter, I think we were going to try and hold answers, so I appreciate you taking a stab at it, but I think we were trying to get through all the questions just in the sake of time. So
okay, thank you. Sorry.
No, that's okay, and I meant that towards Peter Martini, not Fishalis. So thank you, Peter Fishalis, for your question. Was that it? Okay, awesome. Who else has questions?
Heather has her hand up. And we're going to go through the committee first. So citizens, if you don't mind waiting. Heather?
Okay, great. I'll be quick. The primary question was logistically on parking. I know, Kristen, that you mentioned that for the first three of those combination options, we stayed under the 15% as long as parking stayed the same. And so my question, and I'm not sure if it's actually for the designer or for all of us to just look at, is that a realistic assumption that parking stays the same if we are increasing gym and auditorium size? And so I just want to be fully aware of, if we start to talk about options of combining, what are the parking implications, and do we need to look at more parking, and what else would that affect? The second would be, when we talking about these bid options ideas, which I think in concept is great to bring to the town. I would love to. I also would want to understand the ramifications of that. Does that mean that all of a sudden we're asking our design team to do two different designs, and is that going to cost us more in the short term to do that? And what would be the ramifications of that? And the last thing, I guess, is just more of a comment that I do want to keep in mind. A couple of people have said we haven't heard feedback from the town, and I just want to point out that the whole reason that we did the survey was to get townwide feedback. And granted, it doesn't give us a very clear winner in these options, but I do think it's important to look at what we've heard there. So anyway, that's it. I'll make it quick.
Is there anyone else from the committee who would care to comment or put in their 2 cents? Court?
Just very quickly, should the 2 MIAA size courts be under consideration in the future, I will return to the town manager and ask the question about the town taking on an enterprise fund approach to management of the community facing side of such a feature in the building. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone, we've heard from, I think, all of our citizen members. Are there any of our staff members who would like to ask a question or need any clarification?
Thanks, Pat. I spend all day on this, so I don't have any other questions. I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
I guess, Pat, I would just make a comment that I think, you know, we did the survey, and it would have been nice if there was a clear mandate for the committee, but there wasn't. And so we're stuck in this place, and this comment is just about process, not about the merits of any of the decisions, one side or the other. But the charge of the committee was to take those votes and make those decisions and present them to the select board. The process that's laid out really only that we have in place, you know, says that the town is going to vote on a warrant article. I don't know any other way for a binding vote, you know, to occur absent a town meeting. So I think, and the decisions that are going to be made on these items are, you know, the people in these boxes here have the most information and most details with which to make those decisions. And whether it's this week, next week, 2 weeks from then, are we going to have more information that's going to inform those decisions, or are we going to have basically the same amount of information we have today? And I think as a group, we just need to be prepared to, you know, make some tough choices given the information and feedback we've gotten, and continue to move the project forward. Because as I said earlier, you know, the only mandate we have is to present a project back to the community. And like I said, I think there's tough choices ahead, but you know, I think that, you know, building on listening to Matt, Matt Root, you know, the one thing the survey told us is that there's going to be a fair number of people upset no matter what decision we make. And I think we just have to be okay that that's going to be the outcome. And hopefully people who are upset will at least respect the level of thought and care and, you know, listening that we all put into the process, and respect the decision of the committee. But I just think, you know, we need to gird ourselves for those votes and take them when the time is right.
Stephen, can you require or can you allow an additional vote at town meeting for an article that requests funding for, let's say, that second gym? Second gym is a big ask, and you know, I have no objection to having a second gym. I just think the questions that are coming from everybody have to do with the fact that, how do we make that decision? And isn't that really a town decision separate from the decision around what's required for the educational program? You know, we've done the latter. You know, the former is, you know, is a big question, and I don't know why it can't be unbundled and put out to the town meeting as its own article at the same time that we do the school funding.
Can I just clarify something in that question? Charlie, you said second gym, but we're not actually talking about a second gym, right? I mean, I think.
Second, I'm talking about the
second court
funding. Yes, I'm talking about the second court. Yes. Exactly.
Okay, I just want to clarify, because I've had a couple of people reach out to me saying, wait, the middle school is talking about building 2 gyms. And so I just want to clarify, we're not talking about 2 gyms. We're talking about a gym a little bit larger to support 2 basketball courts. Just
when we go,
clear.
This question is more specific. When we go from 8,600, which was option 1, up to 13,400, you know, we have, we've made a big jump. And should, you know, one way of asking the question is, should that jump be reflected in a second article at town meeting that is voted at the same time as the article for the school itself?
Okay, thank you, Charlie. I want to make sure people have had a chance to ask their questions about the construction delivery method. We've got.
You want us to ask those questions now?
Yeah, let's move on to those. Yep.
Yeah, Heather, you had your hand. Did you have your hand raised?
Yeah, sure. Just
Excuse me.
yes. I don't have to go first, but just because it didn't seem like anybody else jumped in.
Hold on, Heather. Court, were you going to ask about gymnasium auditorium before we moved on?
Auditorium, I think.
Auditorium. Sorry, Heather.
On gym, and I don't want to move from gym and auditorium until we let people
Okay,
talk
all
auditorium.
right, sure, yeah.
Thank you.
So does
by way
anyone-
of by way of auditorium conversation, I would note that, and I think most of us know this, the schools in Concord have auditoriums that seat roughly 50% of the population. And I'm not taking a position right now, but we have a 270 now. If we were to move it to 350, which was the 80 ad that Kristen referenced, that would put us in line with the other schools in town if we wanted that as a benchmark to consider what it would provide us.
And this is Charlie. This also causes us to come back to Chris Popoff's question around parking. We need to understand what the guidance is relative to the gym options and the consequences of those choices from a parking perspective. What is the guidance and what are the implications from a parking point of view for those options?
Okay. All right, do I have any other committee members with auditorium questions? All right, let's go through our the construction delivery method questions. And what I'm imagining is going to happen, we're going to compile these questions, we're going to get answers to them, and we'll send them out to the committee prior to next week. Matt?
Okay, so, well, which Matt, but I'll
Matt
start
Johnson,
speaking.
I'm sorry.
All right, so sure, we both had our hand up, but
Yeah.
so first of all, I think that Ian's more detailed comparison was very, very helpful. I'm really appreciative to get a little bit deeper discussion on this. But one thing that seemed missing to me that I've always heard about design bid build is the change order process and the potential risk, scope risk and cost related to change orders. And that's not represented as far as I could see there. The other question I had was around that expectation of higher total project cost. And I'd love to see kind of the data behind that, because it wasn't evident to me when we looked through all the other projects that was a variable, that was determining cost. That there were other variables that seemed to be driving the cost of different projects being higher versus lower. And I didn't notice that the project build method was really the determinant. So I'd just love to see that and understand, why that's the case. And then the third question I'd have is, I think that there's been concern expressed around that, we're looking for this sort of net zero ready design, and that requires some more special capabilities, and that will we be limiting our choices or the quality of the result if we do that? Again, Ian stated that either option was equivalent, but just that, he was also saying this is a fairly straightforward project, and that's one aspect, at least that seems to me to be potentially distinct from your typical project.
Okay. Matt Root, your hands up.
Yeah, I think I have a similar question to Matt's in terms of that cost analysis and the roughly 5 to 9% premium that Ian, your presentation suggested for the CM at risk. And again, also thank you for that detailed side-by-side analysis. That was, I think, super helpful. But I guess I too would like to dig into those numbers a little bit more. I mean, it seems obvious that there's the $300,000 to $400,000 additional cost for pre-construction services. And then I'm wondering more about, so where does the additional, $4.5 million to $8.5 million come from going with CM at risk? And I guess I'd also just observe that, so we could maybe agree on what a price percent increase is for CM at risk. I think there are CM at risk advocates who would say that process would also find savings that would reduce that. But I guess, yeah, I have concerns about the presentation of it suggests that suddenly we're going, it's not guaranteed that we're going to be at 100 million when we go through the bid process. And so I have concerns that folks might see that presentation and think, well, if we choose CM at risk, then suddenly we're setting a project at up to $109 million. So I mean, again, I really do appreciate that comparison. I think I will observe that I think it also reflects the recommendation of design bid build. I think there are some responses to some of those to some of those points and the suggested equity between those two delivery methods. Maybe my second question, just to get to my questions, would be a little bit more on the schedule. The schedule in the comparison suggests that we might not have a final number until a little later in the process. That's fine. I understand that, and that part of it might be delayed in the CM at risk. But I think as Scott's emails, one of the community members who's advocated for further consideration of CM at risk, which thank you, Scott, if you're out there, those were great feedback. He's done an analysis looking at the savings and schedule overall of the CM at risk process. And so my question is, it would be helpful to better understand the potential savings there. I'll do the same thing I did last time, just so I've got the floor. Those are my two questions, just my comments. About CM at risk. I wonder aloud if all of the discussion about the sizing of the gym, if there's benefit to having CM at risk process, that might be able to help ease us in making those decisions. It would allow us to get pricing earlier on in the process, which would address Peter's question, for example, about what is the actual cost of expanding the gym. So I guess I'd say there's one point for CM at risk, is, at least in my opinion, and maybe this is a question too, that it would be able to help provide this committee with some earlier guidance, which we may find value in. I think also the amazing kind of volatility in material prices right now within the construction process, that CM at risk would help kind of smooth those out. And so maybe that's a question, is that true that CM at risk would allow us to better understand the large fluctuations that the construction industry is seeing right now in terms of costs, for example, on materials like wood. So I'll yield the floor, but thank you.
I just want to make one quick comment, Pat, sorry. I just want to be clear, in terms of our funding, we have our appropriation. It is largely obligated already. And so if we want to bring on an additional consultant or go out to bid and get a CM AR now, we would need to go back to town for more money for that. And so I just, when we talk about the method of construction, we are talking about after schematic design, if the town meeting approves the funding and town voters approve the funding is when we would be into that. Right now, we don't have an appropriation to do that.
Right, and I don't think that, I think it would, I guess I'd love to hear when, from the team, when that would have to, when the CMO would come on board, and would that be an issue for going for that process? I'm sorry, I actually have one more question. In Scott's email, I believe it was suggested that there is a little more flexibility in subcontractor selections and the filed sub bid. And I know Peter Martini, you highlighted what is not filed sub bid, and that was helpful. Is that, and maybe I was misunderstanding Scott's point, I don't want to mischaracterize his message, but I interpreted it that there was a little more flexibility in terms of subcontractor selection when you're at CM at risk versus design bid build. And my question is that true?
Thanks, Matt. Who else has questions?
I do.
Hey, Charlie.
Jonathan Harris has had his hand up for a while.
Oh,
I don't know if you can see the hands or not.
I can't.
Okay.
No, thank you for pointing that out. Sorry,
Jonathan
Charlie.
Harris, and then Chris, and then Heather, and then Charlie.
Great, thank you. I just have a quick process procurement question. With design bid build, there's a competitive process to determine the price. And I'm curious to find out how the GMP is decided. Is it just by the contractor? And does the designer or the OPM or the town have any influence in that price?
Okay, thank you. Charlie? I'm sorry, Chris, you had your hand up for a while.
Just a couple questions. Which method does do Hill and SMA believe is easier for them to work with? And if we were going without a construction manager at risk, if there are unforeseen discoveries, and alas, if there are mistakes, how would Hill and SMMA deal with those unforeseen circumstances and mistakes?
Great. Thank you, Chris. Heather?
Great, thank you. I'll try to list my questions really quickly. Some of them come from the emails we've received, which have been really helpful to me. The first, I know it was portrayed in one of them, I think Mr. Slemmies as CMAR being kind of insurance against this price going way up. And I've seen the cost discussion. I guess I'd love to get a little bit more feel for I guess the scope that we could be talking about. If we're talking about X percentage in insurance costs, what do we think we're protecting against? How high could this go without that insurance? Next one would be a couple different things. There are several towns around us, AB, Lexington, Waltham, and a few others that are all using CM at risk. And so is that, and the answer might be that those are the more complicated types that you've been talking about, but is that why? Is ours really more simple than theirs? Third, I remember hearing in a Concord CAN presentation that sustainability and supporting sustainability was more easily done in CM at risk. And is that true? Or maybe that's outdated. Okay, maybe not. I'm seeing a head shake. And the last one just really relates to all of those, which is if these comments and questions that I'm asking are outdated somehow because some of the information being shared is based on projects that are several years ago. Is that so, and how so? You know, basically, how have things changed over the past, I guess, 5 or 6 years that would make this a different decision now than it would have been then? Okay, that's my questions.
Thank you. Charlie.
Yeah, I have a few questions here. First, you know, it's a question about quality. Some other people have asked the quality question, but I'm going to ask it a slightly different way. The company names on the document from Ian make a comparison. Now, I'm just wondering, for example, Turner, Shawmut, Sconsa, Gilbane, and so forth are pretty high quality companies. And my understanding is that we are able to get a higher quality construction management company with the CMAR than we are through DBB. Do we get you know, the top quality people like Turner, you know, if we go DBB? Are they taking DBB deals? You know, and it's just a more general quality question. Are we going to get the same level of quality on both sides of the equation? And second, I want to reiterate the question on cost. My sense and my understanding is that yes, we have some upfront costs, but we are better positioned through CMAR to deal with the risk going through the project in terms of coming in on budget, as opposed to the DBB, which has got issues with respect to, or potential issues with respect to change orders and so forth. So I think it's going to be important to think about how we present this 5 to 9 million additional cost of CMAR that was quoted, because, you know, it may be potentially there's risk for it being you know, equally the same or worse on the DBB side. So let's try to deal with that in a more concise way. And last, on schedule, the schedule situation is I'm hearing that, you know, 2 years to do the project as opposed to what we've got for 18 months. So that ought to be thought about and discussed a little bit more.
Thank you, Charlie. It is 9:49. Let's, Court, do you want to get some questions and then we can maybe get some citizens?
Yes, please. I think you know my inclination toward risk mitigation with a project of this scope. The 5 to 9% cost add for construction manager at risk was portrayed as a given cost add. It was even highlighted. I wonder, sometimes people benefit from purchasing insurance. Sometimes the customer makes out. Is there ever savings when we look at these hundreds of school projects that have used a construction manager at risk? Have there been financial benefits as well as other risk mitigation benefits? I would imagine sometimes there are savings. I think we deserve that data. And then finally, we have a very recent experience at the high school, and I would hope that we hear from people who were involved in that project as to the merits of their choice. Thank you.
Thanks, Court. Charlie, you have your hand still up. Do you have?
Oh,
you don't have another question?
I'm trying to undo it.
Okay, great. Are we ready to move on to our public comments, or do we have more questions? And if you think of more questions, you can certainly send them into the chairs and we can try to get answers before the 15th. Kristen, am I making a false promise, or do you think we can respond to these questions before the 15th?
I think that we can send something out in advance as much as we can anyway and handle the rest in the meeting.
Okay, doke.
Anything if we can't get to it.
Okay. Any more committee members? Okay, Jennifer, you've been very patient.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Montbach, 45 Pine Street, and I am speaking on behalf of the Concord Association of Music Parents, which is a new organization formed to support the work of our faculty at the middle school and beyond. And we are deeply concerned about the projected size of the auditorium. We felt that the Sanborn Auditorium as it exists now is already grossly inadequate, and to see it reduced in size is deeply concerning. We submitted a detailed letter with over 100 Concord residents co-signing, and I've posted that to concordamp.org for anyone who wants to read it. I hope the committee received that letter. Can anyone acknowledge that?
Yes, Jennifer, we did receive
Okay,
it.
great.
Thank you. I didn't call out specific ones during correspondence, but we did receive
Yeah,
it.
okay, no problem. We feel that it's inadequate for the educational needs because it reduces, availability of teaching space. It's, of course, inadequate for any concerts. 275 seats will not accommodate parents and siblings for one ensemble, never mind a combined ensemble. And it's inadequate for meetings. Quite frankly, I've been to several meetings at CMS over the years, orientations, required meetings prior to class trips, award ceremonies, all of this kind of thing. They have never been adequate. There's always been standing room only and people spilling out into the hallways. So I don't think we can expect everything to happen at the high school in terms of capacity. And we really need to look both from a safety perspective and an equity perspective in terms of valuing the arts as much as we value athletics and other academic areas, and need to make sure that this auditorium really meets the needs of the community, which as representatives of the musical families, we feel that it does not.
Thank you, Jennifer. Louis, and then Dean, and then Tracy.
Thank you. Louis Salemi, 68 Great Meadows Road. I was one of the 2 people who submitted a detailed letter or outlining the benefits of CM at risk. So by way of background, I was the vice chair of the high school building committee and lived and died, throughout the process. And what I will state up front is that having Turner and going CM at risk was by far the best decision that we ever made. I'm not going to go through my detailed letter, which is 3 pages long, but to be critical of the comments, that were made by Hill, I think they're disingenuous to suggest that your costs are going to go up by 5 to 9%. I can state from personal experience that having Turner on board easily saved us $20 million. Concord actually has a history of going design, bid, build. I was not on the Willard project, but I had several friends who were on it. And that project, even though not that many people knew about it, had some serious issues in the field. Once the high school project broke ground, it was smooth sailing, and we actually saved a fortune once we actually got the shovel in the ground. Secondly, I currently serve on the Concord Library building project, and it is a who's who, excluding me, of who knows construction. Jeff Adams is the chair. Elise Woodward, who also served on the high school project, and actually Jeff served on the high school project with me, is in charge of the design subcommittee. And John Boynton, who knows construction well, actually is raising all the money. This is a $10 million project, and it went CM at risk. What you're looking at is a $100 million project. And with all due respect to Hill, any project that's $100 million is highly complex by definition. The other point I want to make is this project is going to go out to bid in the 2023 timeframe. I still have a number of friends who are in the construction industry, and everyone tells me the greater Boston area is going to be a bidding war, and you're going to have a very hard time getting subs to bid on the project. What the CM brings to the project is basically they're subcontractors who are very loyal to them. So let's say Shawmut or Turner or one of the other firms was selected as the CM, they're going to have their cement guy, their steel guy, their mechanical system guy that's going to come with them. If you go DBB, you're basically putting it out to bid. And the risk is either no one shows up to bid, or secondly, if somebody comes up to bid, the bid is 20 to 30% higher than what you were expecting. And just finally, and this is not a criticism of the town of Concord, the high school project actually had a great collaborative process with the town. The town engineers are extremely exacting, and they're super talented people. Doing business in Concord on the construction side is very different than other town. We have very capable engineers who actually have to permit the job. And it's better to get a CM early on to actually work with the town engineers to get the scope of work and the order of conditions early on, because this is a huge cost driver. Thank you for your time. And just a final point that I want to make is that to some extent, your job is a lot harder than the high school's project's job. A high school had the MSBA essentially as a constraint, what we could and could not do. This committee, basically it's open-ended and you're trying to figure out what are the upper limits. So I commend all of you for volunteering and trying to weigh, gym, auditorium, et cetera, et cetera. I would just urge you for the sake of the town to make sure you basically have some insurance that you go CM at risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. It is almost 10 o'clock. Everyone has been very good to hang in there this long. We have two more citizens, Dean and Tracy. So if you could make be clear about questions you might want to have answered and be succinct, that would be great.
Who do you want first? Well, okay. Yeah, Dean Banfield, 73 Walden Terrace. I'm Finance Committee observer and so speaking for myself in this question. When Ian presented the parallel side-by-sides, there was a specific risk point in DBB at which you go out to bid, and then you may have a negative feedback loop where the bid comes in way too high and you have to go back and potentially adjust your scope. I have some concerns about our 555 number. Whenever I see the chart that Kristen presents, the big line and the big X seem to be in the lower third of the chart. So I feel as though there's as a risk factor with the 555 number. And so we could get into that negative feedback loop with DBB. I just want to know in CMAR, where is a scope adjustment? Where would that occur in a CMAR process? So that's what I'd like to know.
Thank you. Thank you. Tracy.
Good morning. I've spoken at Tracy Morano, 39 Partridge Lane, speaking on behalf of myself. I've spoken many times about the auditorium, so I will not do that again. I think you know how I feel about that, and I will continue to write another letter this week. I think that there were many people on the call that it's gone very long today, as we know, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. And I think that the committee needs to realize that there is a lot of support out there for the building committee, but also getting the building right. And I think that, all these people are going to come to town meeting. They're going to be your voters. They may not be at your meetings. They may not be writing emails. Some just, quite frankly, don't have the time to do it. There were people that wanted to speak today and they were looking towards that 9:30 mark and they just could not speak today. So there is community interest in this building. There are people that support, obviously, the auditorium, that support the gym. We appreciate the fact that you've surveyed the community, but understand that there's a lot of community folks out there that really, they're the ones that are going to show up to town meeting and they're the ones that are going to vote. And I think we have one shot to get this building right. It is the last school to be built in the town. I've been here through all the town builds, and that I would just urge you to really take a step back and get it right. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Seeing no further hands, Dawn, I'm turning it back over to you to try to wrap up this meeting.
Sure. Thank you, everyone. So much covered here today, but this has been great. And we will, as mentioned, we'll try to get answers in a timely manner to everyone for your questions. So thank you for that. I guess hearing nothing else, we will call a Can I take a motion? Sorry, go ahead,
To
Heather.
adjourn the building committee.
You read my mind. Thank you. Thank you. Stephen Crane.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, any discussion? Sorry, let's be clear. Any discussion? I'm going to assume no. Okay, Stephen Crane.
Yes.
Jared Stanton.
Yes.
Matt Johnson. Lori Hunter.
Yes.
Justin Cameron. He maybe has school.
Yeah, he had to go.
Of course. John Harris.
Yes.
Russ Hughes.
Yes.
Kate Hanley.
Kate had to jump off.
Okay, thank you. Peter Fishalis.
Yes.
Court Booth.
Yes.
Heather Bout.
Yes.
Frank Cannon.
Yes.
Chris Popov.
Yes.
Charlie Parker.
Yes.
Matt Root.
Yes.
Pat Nelson.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Again, thank you all so much for everything today and your questions and feedback and patience as we got through everything. So we meet again on the 15th, 1 week from today, but you'll see answers to questions prior to that.
Thank you.
And if anything else comes up, Pat and I are here. Reach out to us, ask questions if something, comes up between now and then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.